Okay, today's lesson is on special right triangles. And there are two types of special right triangles, okay? And the first type is 45, 45, 90 right triangles, which means these are half of a square, okay? Because they're half of a square, then the two sides, the two legs, these are legs, they're always equal because they're part of the square. Now the hypotenuse has a different bend to it. It's also going to be a common answer, okay? So let's look at this and think, how are we going to find the hypotenuse? Well, let's just think about it. What if the legs were 1? What if these were 1? So to find the hypotenuse, we'd go 1 squared plus 1 squared equals, we'll call it c because that's what you guys are used to. So that's 1 plus 1 equals c squared, so that's 2. So c equals the square root of 2. Okay, big deal. Well, what if they're 2? So 2 squared plus 2 squared equals c squared. So that's 4 plus 4 equals c squared, which is 8. Now, the square root of 8. You guys last year in Integrated 1 simplified radicals. So we look for the largest perfect square, and it's a 4. So c is equal to the square root of 4 times the square root of 2, which is 2 radical 2. Okay, let's see if we can see a pattern. Let's try 3. So these both are 3, the legs, so 9 plus 9 equals c squared, that's 18. The square root of 18 breaks down to 9 and 2, and that's 3 radical 2, 3 square root of 2. Now wait a minute, we should see a pattern here. If you know the leg, you know the hypotenuse is whatever the leg is times radical 2. So the legs are 1, 1 radical 2. The legs are 2, 2 radical 2. The legs are 3, 3 radical 2. So if you know a leg, the hypotenuse is equal to the leg times radical 2. Now if you manipulate this equation, what if you're looking for the leg? Well, if you're looking for the leg, then you're going to take the hypotenuse divided by radical 2. And I'm going to show you a way to do it, a shortcut that's pretty easy right now. So let's say, but I need a number, okay? So let's say that the hypotenuse is 4. That's easy to work with, okay? So that's 4. So we're supposed to find the leg, right? So the leg is equal to 4 divided by radical, 4 radical 2. Now, that doesn't make any sense. I'm not sure that you rationalized denominators last year. If you did not, no worries. This is how you do it. You multiply by 1. In this case, 1 is radical 2 over radical 2, which gives you 4 radical 2, because you're going to multiply straight across. Radical 2 times radical 2 is radical 4. But what's the square root of 4? 2. 4 divided by 2 is 2 radical 2. So those would be the legs. So there must be a way to get to 2 radical 2. There is. And this is the other way that you can find this. So I'm going to erase this leg quick. You could also find the leg by taking the hypotenuse times radical 2 and dividing by 2. So try it. If the hypotenuse is 4, we would put 4 in there. 4 radical 2 over 2 is 2 radical 2. So these, now we don't have to memorize these, but it certainly helps, okay? So if you know the leg, to find the hypotenuse, you take leg times radical 2. If you know the hypotenuse, to find the leg, you can divide by radical 2, or take the hypotenuse times radical 2 all over 2. So let's do some problems here. Here is the problem that I would always have. I would have this picture. Leg is x, the other leg is x. So the hypotenuse is x times radical 2, whatever x is, whatever the leg is. And then I would write them out as well. I would write these formulas and have them handy. Okay, so if our leg is 5, what's our other leg? Well, obviously it's 5. So what's our hypotenuse? Oh, it's got to be 5 radical 2. That was easy. Okay, now let's go backwards. 3 radical 2. So this is 3 radical 2. So x must be what in this case then? Yeah, it must be 3, right? Because we're supposed to take the hypotenuse divided by radical 2 to find the leg. Hey, those cancel. You get 3. What about 6 radical 2? Well, we divide by radical 2, we get 6. That makes sense. Now, this is where we have to use this little cheat formula up there. The hypotenuse is 10. You see that? So now we can go to this formula that we created, the hypotenuse times radical 2 divided by 2. So we're going to take 10 radical 2 divided by 2. I'm just using the formula. Hypotenuse times radical 2 divided by 2. Well, 10 divided by 2 is 5. So the legs are 5 times the square root of 2. Okay, pause that, replay it, and see if you can find those patterns. So here are our rules. When you are given the length of a leg, multiply by radical 2. When you're given the hypotenuse, divide by radical 2 to get the length of the leg. Or we're going to add this. Take the leg times radical 2 divided by 2. You could also do that. Sometimes this is better than this, but sometimes this one's better than this. So for instance, on number 1, it's easier just to divide by radical 2. So 6 radical 2, we're going to divide by radical 2. We get 6. So both those legs are 6. Number 2, if a leg is 4, then the other leg's 4. So the hypotenuse is 4 radical 2. Now, 3, how do we get the legs? Well, we divide by radical 2. Ugh, that's ugly though, isn't it? So let's use this one. Let's use this one up here. So we're going to take, I shouldn't say leg, it should say hypotenuse. I apologize. That should say hypotenuse. There you go. So we take 6 radical 2 divided by 2. Well, 2 goes into 6 3 times. So those legs are 3 radical 2 and 3 radical 2. And we didn't have to do any math, really. Now those are 45, 45, 90s. Those are the first special right triangles, half of a square. Now the next triangle we're going to talk about is a 30, 60, 90. A 30, 60, 90 is half of an equilateral triangle, okay? So all the sides are equal, and you told me before, you've said it, those are 60. All the angles are 60. Well, if you take half of 60, you get a 30, okay? So what this means then is that if this, let's say this is 2 and 2 and 2. When I draw this in, what does it do to this side right down here? Well, it cuts it in half. So that's only 1. So the third side right there is going to be a different measure, obviously, but the hypotenuse is 2, and the short leg is 1, we're going to find the long leg. So if we use the Pythagorean theorem, we'll call the long leg, what do we want to call the long leg? We'll just call it x. So 1 squared plus x squared equals 2 squared. So that's 4. So x squared equals 3. So x is equal to radical 3. So up here it was radical 2, the hypotenuse, but here we're going to use radical 3. So here's the triangle that we're going to base it out of. This is called the short leg. We call that x. The long leg then is equal to x times radical 3, and the hypotenuse is 2 times the short leg. So if I summarize that, I would write it like this. Let me erase this quick, and then, so this is short, long, and hypotenuse. Okay, so the short leg, all right, sorry, I'm going to start with the long leg. The long leg is the short leg times radical 3. The hypotenuse is the short leg times 2. But what if we don't know the short leg? Well, that would mean it's the hypotenuse divided by 2, or the long leg divided by radical 3. Now that's an ugly answer. Now remember, we simplified it up above, and I could go through how to simplify it, but I'm just going to give it to you, okay? Or you could also say that it is long leg times radical 3 all over 3. So either one of those 3 formulas will give you the short leg. And once you have the short leg, you can double it to find the hypotenuse. You can find everything else. So looking at this box here, it says the short leg is 6. So what's the hypotenuse? Well, it's 2 times x. Well, it's 2 times 6. So it's 12. What's the long leg? Well, x is 6, so we just plug it in there. It's 6 radical 3. That one's an easy one. All right. Well, what if the hypotenuse is 20? What's x? Half of it, right? 10. So the long leg is 10 radical 3. All right. Long leg's 4 radical 3. So what's the short leg? Well, we're going to, obviously x is 4, right? 4 radical 3. That's easy. So the hypotenuse is 8. So none of those are really challenging. But we will come back to those formulas possibly. All right, so here are the rules if we write it, because some people like words. When you're given the length of the short leg, multiply by radical 3 to get the long leg. When you're given the given the length of the short leg, multiply by 2 to get the length of the hypotenuse. Now, when you're given the hypotenuse, divide by 2 to get the length of the short leg. And if you're given the long leg, divide by radical 3 to get the length of the short leg, or multiply by radical 3 over 3. That's that shortcut up there, this last one, this one right there. Okay, so let's work through this. What is 10? That's the first thing you must identify. In this case, obviously, it's the hypotenuse. So the short leg is half the hypotenuse. And the long leg is the short leg times radical 3. Now, I've had a lot of time with this, but it's all right here in words. It's all right there. Or symbols. You can use those too right here. Okay? So let's say on number 2, the hypotenuse is 4 radical 3. Well, the short leg is half the hypotenuse, so we divide by 2. What's half of 4 radical 3's? 2 radical 3's. Well, how do we get the long leg? We take the short leg and multiply it by radical 3. Tells us to do that right there. Well, radical 3 times radical 3 is 3. So 2 times 3 is 6. Now remember, anytime I'm going too fast, you just pause it and replay it. And then the last one, that's probably the toughest one. The long leg is 18. Now dividing by rad 3 here doesn't help us much, but this does. Let's multiply by radical 3 divided by 3. Aha! 3 goes into 18 6 times. So your short leg is 6 radical 3's. What's your hypotenuse? Well, it's always twice as long as the short leg. So 2 times 6 radical 3 is 12 radical 3. Okay? So that concludes our lesson for special